Gregory Larkin wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a man of great ambition. He was just an ordinary delivery man, doing his best to get through each day without too much trouble. His job was simple, carrying packages from place to place, and if he was lucky, he could finish his route early enough to enjoy a quiet evening. There was no adventure in his life, no excitement, just the steady hum of his routine. But all that was about to change. It was a Tuesday morning, and Greg had just started his shift when he was handed a strange job. The office manager, Nancy, called him over to her desk. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, her face serious even when she smiled. "Greg," she said, "I've got a special delivery for you today." "Special?" Greg asked, raising an eyebrow. Special deliveries were rare, and usually they meant something that required more effort than usual. He wasn't sure if he liked that idea. "Yeah," Nancy continued, glancing at the papers in front of her. "It's a package going to a secluded estate up in the mountains. It's heavy and a bit unusual, but you're the only one with the time to do it." Greg frowned. He had heard stories about the mountain estates, mostly from tourists who said they were too spooky to visit. The roads up there were narrow and winding, and not everyone made it back in one piece. "I'm not sure," Greg said slowly, tapping his fingers on the counter. "I'm not really a fan of mountain drives, Nancy." Nancy looked at him over the top of her glasses. "It's just a delivery, Greg. You've handled worse. Plus, the pay is double for a special job." That caught his attention. "Double pay?" That was more than enough to convince him. "All right, I'll take it." Nancy handed him the package, and Greg immediately felt how heavy it was. It wasn't the size of it that made it strange, it was the weight. It felt as though it was made of something far denser than anything he had delivered before. It wasn't a box or a bag, but a large, ornate chest covered in scratches and mysterious symbols. The wood felt old, as if it had been around for centuries, and there was a faint glow to the markings on its surface, though Greg wasn't sure if he was imagining that. He didn't have time to dwell on it. He tossed it into the back of his delivery truck and set off. The morning air was crisp, and as he drove away from the city, the noise of traffic faded behind him. He drove for miles, through the quiet outskirts, and finally onto the mountain road. The higher he climbed, the quieter the world around him became. The houses became fewer, and the trees grew taller. By the time Greg reached the foot of the mountain, a mist had begun to form, swirling around the base like a fog. The sun, now hidden behind thick clouds, cast a dim, gray light across the landscape. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie. Greg couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Still, he pressed on, telling himself it was just a delivery, nothing more. After a long and winding drive, Greg finally saw the estate in the distance. It looked abandoned, even though it clearly wasn't. The grand stone gates were rusted, and the high walls surrounding the estate seemed to stretch far into the mist. The house itself stood at the top of a hill, a mansion with tall windows and a weathered roof. It looked like it had been here for hundreds of years. As Greg pulled up to the front gate, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt still, and the only sound was the crunch of his tires against the gravel. He got out of the truck, the chest heavy in his hands. As he walked toward the gate, he noticed how quiet everything was. There were no birds, no animals, nothing. The gate creaked loudly as Greg pushed it open. A chill ran down his spine. He glanced over his shoulder but saw nothing unusual, just the thick mist swirling around like a blanket. The front door of the mansion was already open when Greg reached it. He paused for a moment, wondering if he should knock, but decided against it. It was a delivery, after all. Stepping inside, Greg was immediately struck by the cold. It was as if the mansion hadn't been lived in for years. The walls were lined with old portraits, their eyes following him as he moved. The floor was covered in dust, and the furniture was old and ornate, but untouched, like a museum display. Everything felt frozen in time. "Hello?" Greg called out. His voice echoed in the silence. No answer. He stepped forward, cautiously making his way through the large entryway and into a hallway. There was a grand staircase ahead of him, leading up to the second floor. His footsteps were the only sound, as the mist outside seemed to have seeped into the house, thickening the air. At the end of the hall was a large room, its doors wide open. Inside, an older man stood, staring out the window. He was tall and thin, dressed in a long robe of dark, rich fabric that seemed out of place for someone who lived in such an old, decrepit mansion. His hair was silver, his face sharp and defined, and his eyes glowed faintly with a strange light. "Ah, you've arrived," the man said, without turning to look at Greg. Greg stood there, stunned. I have a delivery for you," he said, lifting the chest. "Where do you want it?" The man turned, and Greg felt a sudden, inexplicable jolt of fear. His eyes weren't just glowing, they were burning, a bright golden hue that seemed to pierce through Greg's very soul. But before he could react, the man smiled. "Place it here," he said, pointing to a large, ancient table in the center of the room. "It has been a long time since the dragons called upon a mortal like you." Greg frowned, unsure of what the man was talking about. He set the chest down on the table as instructed, but something felt wrong. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to deepen. As soon as the chest touched the surface of the table, the ground beneath Greg's feet began to tremble. At first, it was a small shake, like an earthquake. But then it grew stronger. The walls of the mansion groaned and the window rattled. Greg stumbled back, his heart pounding. The man stood completely still, his face unreadable. The chest began to glow, its markings brighter now, like flames dancing along its surface. Greg watched in awe, his mouth dry. And then from the window, a sound came. It was a low, rumbling growl, one that echoed through the mansion like thunder. Greg spun around, his eyes wide with panic. Outside, in the swirling mist, something massive moved. A shadow. A giant shadow, with wings that stretched across the sky. Greg's breath caught in his throat. For the first time in his life, he realized he wasn't just a delivery man anymore. The trembling of the mansion grew stronger, and the ground beneath Greg's feet shook with an unnatural force. He barely had time to react before the ancient chest on the table began to glow brighter. The symbols carved into its surface flickered like burning embers, casting strange, elongated shadows across the room. Greg's heart raced. He wanted to turn and run, but something kept him frozen in place. The noise from outside, the low, rumbling growl, grew louder, shaking the walls of the mansion as if something massive was approaching. He turned back to the man in the robe, his mind racing. "What's happening?" Greg asked, his voice trembling. "What is that sound?" The man, who had not moved since Greg entered the room, finally spoke. His voice was calm, as if he were explaining something simple. "The dragons are awakening." "Dragons?" Greg repeated, confused. "Dragons aren't real. That's just—" "It is real," the man interrupted. His eyes glowed brightly, their golden hue almost blinding. "And you, Greg Larkin, are the one who has set them free." Greg's mind was spinning. Dragons. The only dragons he'd ever heard of were in stories and myths, tales that children told around campfires. He had no idea what was happening, but something deep inside him told him that he was involved in something far bigger than he could understand. He took a step back, still staring at the chest. The rumbling outside was growing louder. Whatever it was getting closer. The man stepped forward, his long robe swishing as he moved. "You must understand, Greg, the dragons were once the rulers of this world. But they were betrayed by those who feared their power. They were imprisoned, locked away by magic and time until one of their own, a key, could release them." "A key?" Greg asked, still not sure if he was dreaming or losing his mind. The man nodded slowly. You are the key, Greg. The chest, the symbols, the dragons, they are all part of a pact that was made long ago. You have unlocked it. The weight of the words settled on Greg like a heavy stone. He had heard of old legends, of course, but they were always just stories. He had never believed them, and he certainly never thought he would be involved in something like this. Yet, as he looked at the glowing chest and heard the rumble of the creature outside, he couldn't deny that something was happening, something impossible. Why me? Greg whispered almost to himself. The man's expression softened for the first time. It was not by your choice, but by fate. You delivered the chest. You are the one who broke the seal. Greg's eyes widened. So, it's my fault? The man shook his head. No. The dragons have been waiting for centuries. They knew the time would come. You merely opened the door for them. Before Greg could say anything more, the chest gave off a final bright flash of light. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and the rumbling outside intensified, shaking the floor beneath Greg's feet. He staggered, nearly losing his balance. Then, the ground beneath the mansion cracked, a deep fissure opening in the earth. From the crack, a massive shadow loomed, stretching toward the sky. Greg stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror. He could hear the wings flapping now, loud, powerful beats that sent the air around him vibrating. The man raised his hand and waved it toward the window. Look, he said softly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. They are here. Greg rushed to the window, his breath catching in his throat as he looked out into the mist. A colossal figure emerged from the fog, a dragon. Its scales shimmered like molten gold, its eyes glowing with an ancient, otherworldly light. The dragon's wings were enormous, stretching out like a living storm cloud, and its body was long and powerful, each movement sending shockwaves through the ground. Greg's heart raced. He had seen dragons in movies, in books, but nothing could have prepared him for this. This wasn't a creature of fantasy. This was real. The dragon's gaze turned toward the mansion. Its eyes locked onto Greg's, and for a moment, everything felt still. Time seemed to freeze as the creature's gaze pierced through him. Then, without warning, the dragon let out a deafening roar, a sound that echoed through the mountains, rattling the windows of the mansion. Greg stumbled back from the window, his mind in a fog. He turned to the man. What do we do? What do we do now? His voice cracked. The man did not seem worried. Instead, he walked calmly toward the door and opened it, stepping out onto the balcony that overlooked the estate. Now, Greg Larkin, you will meet your destiny. Greg followed him hesitantly, stepping out into the cool, mist-filled air. The dragon was no longer a distant shadow. It was standing before them, its massive form blocking the view of the mountain peaks. Its wings flared open, and Greg could feel the heat radiating from its body. Another dragon appeared beside it, then another. Slowly, the skies filled with dragons, each more magnificent and terrifying than the last. The sound of their wings beating filled the air, and the ground seemed to tremble with each movement. Greg was speechless, standing frozen as the dragons circled the mansion. He glanced at the man beside him, but the man seemed completely unfazed by the sight before them. He looked up at the largest dragon, the one that had roared earlier. "This is the first one," the man said. "The leader of the dragons. His name is Kael'rith. He is the one who will guide them." Greg's voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "And what am I supposed to do?" The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You, Greg Larkin, are the key to their power. The chest you delivered contained the ancient bond that holds them to the earth. But that bond is now broken. They are free, and they will follow you." Greg shook his head. "I don't know anything about dragons. I don't know anything about this." He waved his hand around helplessly. Kael'rith, the largest dragon, took a step forward. lowering his head so that his glowing eyes were level with Greg's. The heat from the dragon's breath washed over Greg, but he couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot. Kael'rith's voice filled his mind, deep and rumbling. Humyn, you are the one who has opened the way for us. We will follow you, for you are our master now. Our time has come again, and we will reclaim what is ours. Greg's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to run, to get away from this. But something told him he couldn't. The dragons were here, and he was the one they had chosen. What do you want from me? Greg asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kael'rith's eyes glowed brighter. You will help us restore our kingdom. The world has changed, Humyn, and we need your strength to reclaim what was taken from us. Greg swallowed hard. He was just a delivery man. What could he possibly do? He wasn't strong like the dragons. He didn't have their power or their magic. But Kael'rith spoke again, his voice like thunder in Greg's mind. You have the strength within you, Humyn. The chest has given you a power you do not yet understand. The dragons are your allies. And you are our key. Greg stood there, feeling the weight of the dragon's words pressing down on him. The dragons were here, and they were waiting for him to lead them. And just like that, Greg's life was no longer simple. It was a life bound to the dragons, and there was no turning back. Greg stood frozen, his eyes locked on the massive dragon before him. The wind howled, stirring the mist that surrounded the mansion, but it felt like everything was eerily still. His heart pounded in his chest as Kael'rith, the leader of the dragons, stared down at him with burning eyes. You are the key. The dragon's voice rumbled inside Greg's mind. You unlocked the chest, you broke the bond. Now we are free, and we will follow you. Greg couldn't move. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. A part of him wanted to run far away from this nightmare. But his feet wouldn't obey. He was trapped. The dragons were here, and they were waiting for him. I don't understand, Greg said aloud, his voice shaking. What do you want from me? I'm just a delivery man. Kael'rith's massive head lowered until its glowing eyes were level with Greg's. The heat from the dragon's breath washed over him, but it wasn't enough to burn. It was as if the dragon was testing him. You are more than you think, Greg Larkin, Kael'rith's voice thundered inside his head again. You have the power now. The chest you brought us contained an ancient force, one that binds us to you. The pact has been made. You are our master, and we are your allies. Greg shook his head. No, I can't be your master. I'm not a leader. I don't have any power. I'm just a guy who delivers packages. That's all I am. Kael'rith didn't respond for a moment, his golden eyes studying Greg carefully. Then, slowly, the dragon straightened up, towering over him. The other dragons who had been circling the mansion paused in midair and turned to look at Greg. The man in the robe, who had been standing quietly beside Greg, stepped forward and placed a hand on Greg's shoulder. Listen to me, Greg, he said softly. You are not just any man. You are the one chosen by fate. The dragons need you now. The power you have unleashed is beyond anything you can understand right now. But in time, you will. Greg's head spun as the man's words sank in. This was impossible. He was just an ordinary man with a boring job. How could he possibly lead these ancient creatures? They were dragons, real dragons. The kind of creatures that legends were made of. How could they need him? I can't, Greg said, stepping back. I'm not the one for this. I'm not some hero or leader. You've got the wrong person. The man sighed, looking at Greg with a mixture of pity and understanding. You don't have a choice, Greg. The dragons are here, and they are bound to you now. You opened the chest, and that act made you their key. They will not leave until their empire is restored, and they need you to lead them. They are not asking you to be a king. They are asking you to help them find their place in the world again. Greg ran his hands through his hair, frustration bubbling up inside him. But I don't know how. I've never even been in charge of anything. What if I mess up? What if I make things worse? The man placed a hand on Greg's arm, his grip firm but not unkind. You will make mistakes. Everyone does. But you have something that no one else has. A chance to help these creatures find their place in the world again. The dragons are powerful, yes, but they are lost. They have been imprisoned for centuries, and now they must learn how to live in a world that has changed. That is where you come in. Greg looked back at the dragons. Their enormous wings beat the air with thunderous power, and their glowing eyes were focused on him, waiting for something. He had never felt so small in his life. The power radiating from the dragons was like a force of nature, and he, a simple delivery man, was supposed to lead them. Humyn, Kelrith's voice boomed in his mind once more. The world has changed. We do not belong here anymore, but we will make our place. We cannot do it alone. Will you help us? Greg looked into the dragon's eyes. They were full of ancient knowledge and power, but there was something else there too. A strange kind of trust. As much as he wanted to turn away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was connected to them, tied to their fate in a way that he could not escape. He took a deep breath and slowly nodded. All right, he said, his voice steady but unsure. I'll help you, but I don't know what I'm doing. You'll have to teach me. A sound like a deep rumble echoed from Kelrith, and the other dragons around them flapped their wings in approval. The man beside Greg smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of understanding. You have made the right choice, the man said. Now, we must prepare. For the next few days, Greg's life turned upside down. The mansion, which had once seemed so strange and quiet, became the hub of something far bigger. The dragons settled into the grounds around the mansion, their massive forms lounging in the gardens or perched on the rooftops, watching Greg closely. Greg, for his part, had no idea what to do next. He felt like a man lost in a strange new world. The dragons had given him a role, but he didn't understand what it meant or what was expected of him. He spent most of his time talking with the man in the robe, whose name was Alaric. Alaric had once been a scholar, an expert in the ancient history of the dragons, and he was the one who had brought the chest to the mansion. "Why me?" Greg asked him one evening as they sat on the balcony overlooking the estate. "I'm just an ordinary guy. What made me the one to open the chest? Why couldn't it have been someone else?" Alaric looked out at the dragons, his eyes distant. "The chest was always meant to be unlocked, Greg. The dragons have waited for centuries for someone to set them free. You were chosen because you were at the right place at the right time. The dragons are not bound by simple fate. They are bound by the forces of magic that stretch beyond time itself. And you are the key. You've always been the key." Greg didn't know what to say. It was hard to believe that his life had changed so suddenly. Just a few days ago, he was a man delivering packages. Now he was a leader, whether he wanted to be or not, of the most powerful creatures in existence. One afternoon, as Greg walked through the estate grounds, he was approached by a young dragon, much smaller than Kelrith but still impressive. The dragon had silver scales that sparkled in the sunlight, and its eyes were curious but cautious. Humyn, the dragon's voice echoed in Greg's mind. "Will you teach us your ways?" Greg stopped in his tracks. "Teach you? What do you mean?" "Teach us how to live in this world. We have been in hiding for so long. The world has changed, and we do not know how to survive in it. Will you show us?" Greg swallowed hard. He didn't have the answers. He barely knew how to survive in this world himself, but somehow, he knew this was his responsibility now. He had the power to help the dragons, and whether he liked it or not, he had to find a way to do it. I don't know if I can, Greg said softly, but I'll try. And so, Greg began his strange new life. He wasn't just a delivery man anymore. He was something far more important. He was the bridge between the dragons and the new world, whether he understood it or not. Greg sat alone in his small, quiet room in the mansion. The weight of the past few days pressed heavily on him. He had never imagined his life would change this drastically. One moment, he was just a regular delivery man, and the next, he was the key to freeing the dragons from their ancient prison. The dragons had settled into the grounds around the mansion, their massive forms taking up space as they rested in the gardens, perched on rooftops, or pacing around the large courtyard. They were powerful, ancient, and full of knowledge. Yet they seemed lost, uncertain of how to live in a world that had moved on without them. Greg's role as their leader had been made clear by Kael'rith, the dragon who had first spoken to him. But leading wasn't as easy as it sounded. The dragons didn't just need a leader. They needed a guide, someone who could teach them how to live in this new world. And Greg wasn't sure he was up for the task. As the days passed, he began spending more time with Alaric, trying to understand the dragon's history and the world they had once ruled. Alaric was patient, answering Greg's questions as best he could. But Greg's doubts remained. How could he possibly help these creatures find their place again? One evening, after a long day of talking with the dragons and Alaric, Greg felt exhausted. He walked out onto the balcony of the mansion to get some fresh air, hoping it would clear his mind. The mist had rolled in again, shrouding the estate in a thick, ghostly fog. The sound of wings flapping in the distance made Greg pause. He turned toward the sound, his heart racing. As he looked into the mist, he saw something move, something huge. At first, he thought it was another dragon, but this figure was different. It was glowing, almost as if it was made of light. The figure hovered in the air just outside the mist, and then it began to descend. Greg's breath caught in his throat as the figure landed softly on the ground. It was another dragon, but this one was unlike the others. Its scales shimmered like silver, and its eyes glowed with a soft, pale light. It wasn't like the massive, imposing dragons that had been following him around. It was smaller, more graceful, almost ethereal. The dragon's wings folded neatly at its sides, and it stepped forward. Unlike the others, it didn't make any noise. It simply looked at Greg with an intelligence that seemed beyond anything he had experienced before. Humyn, the dragon's voice echoed in Greg's mind. You have unlocked the chest. You have awakened us, but there is much more to your power than you realize. Greg took a step back, his eyes wide. What do you mean? I don't have any power. I'm just a guy. The dragon tilted its head as if studying him. You do not yet understand. The chest was not just a key to our release. It was a key to unlocking the power inside you. You are now connected to us, Greg Larkin. You have a power that no human has ever known. It is a power that can help us reclaim our place in this world. Greg shook his head. I don't have any powers. I can't even fight, let alone lead dragons. You've got the wrong person. The dragon took a step closer, its glowing eyes never leaving Greg. The power within you is not about strength, Greg. It is about understanding, about leadership. You have the ability to unite us, to guide us through this new world. It is not something you can see, but something you must feel. Greg felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what the dragon was talking about, but something inside him stirred. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time since all this began, he felt different. He didn't know if it was the dragon's words or something else, but he felt a strange warmth deep within him, as though something had awakened. You must not fear it, the dragon continued. The chest unlocked, not just the bond between us, but a power deep within you. You must learn to embrace it, Greg. Only then will you be able to lead us. to restore us to our rightful place. Greg's mind was racing. He wanted to deny what the dragon was saying, but he couldn't. There was something inside him that did feel different. He had been feeling it for days now, an energy that seemed to pulse beneath his skin. It wasn't just the dragons, it was him. But how could he have power? He was just a regular man, a man who had never asked for this, never wanted this. But the dragon was right about one thing. He had no choice. He had already set the dragons free, and now, it seemed, it was up to him to figure out what came next. The next day, Greg woke up with a strange feeling in his chest. It was as if the dragon's words had planted a seed inside him, and now it was starting to grow. He couldn't explain it, but he felt more aware of the world around him. His senses seemed sharper, his mind clearer. When he walked outside, he noticed every detail. The way the wind rustled through the trees, the scent of the earth, the sound of the distant mountains. It was as though the world itself was more vivid, more alive. And yet, at the same time, it felt like something was calling to him, something inside him. He didn't have much time to think about it. The dragons had gathered in the courtyard, their massive forms towering over the estate. Caelrith, the largest of them all, stood in the center, his golden eyes watching Greg as he approached. The other dragons were watching too, waiting for him to take his place. The weight of their gazes was almost too much to bear. He had to do something, anything, to prove that he could lead them. Caelrith stepped forward, his massive claws clicking against the stone floor. Greg Larkin. The dragon's voice boomed in his mind. Today is the day we begin our journey. The world is not as it once was. We need to learn how to survive here, how to thrive. You will show us the way. Greg stood tall, though his heart was racing. This was it. This was the moment he had been dreading. But as he stood there, he felt that strange warmth inside him again. He didn't understand it, but somehow it gave him the strength to stand tall before the dragons. He cleared his throat and took a deep breath. "All right," he said, his voice more confident than he felt. "We'll start by learning about the world around us. It's not the same as it was when you were last free, but we can figure it out together." Caelrith gave a low rumble of approval. "Good, Greg Larkin. Good. We will follow your lead." Greg turned to the other dragons, feeling an odd sense of purpose rise within him. He wasn't sure where this power was coming from, or how long it would last, but in that moment he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. He was going to do everything he could to help these dragons and maybe find out just what he was capable of in the process. As he stood there, surrounded by the ancient dragons, Greg realized that this was only the beginning. The world was about to change, and he was going to be the one to help guide it. Greg stood at the edge of the estate, his eyes scanning the horizon. The dragons were restless, circling the grounds, their powerful wings stirring the air. They were waiting for him. It had been days since he had accepted the responsibility of guiding them, and though he still felt uncertain, something inside him had changed. He had started to embrace the strange power that had awakened within him, and now he understood that he was no longer just a delivery man. He was their leader. The world around him felt different now. It was as though every step he took was more purposeful, more connected to the forces around him. It wasn't just the dragons who were growing stronger, it was him, too. The power that had once felt foreign, almost like an intruder, now felt like a part of him. The dragons had made him their key, but he was beginning to see that he had his own role to play, one that went beyond simply being their guide. It wasn't just about teaching them how to live in this new world. It was about leading them to a new future. Greg turned toward the courtyard, where Caelrith, the largest dragon, waited for him. The dragon's golden eyes gleamed with a mix of respect and expectation. "Greg Larkin," Caelrith's voice echoed in Greg's mind. The world has changed. It is no longer a place where we can reign as we once did, but we will find a way to restore what was lost. We will need your strength, your vision." Greg nodded, but inside, a knot of worry tightened. Kael'rith's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't help but wonder how he could possibly restore something so ancient, so vast, when he barely understood the world he lived in. But there was no time for doubt. The dragons had chosen him, and he had to live up to that trust. "I'll do what I can," Greg said aloud, "but we need to move carefully. We don't know enough about how the world works now. The humans, they won't understand you, not yet. We have to approach this with caution." Kael'rith tilted his head, his fiery breath steaming in the cold air. "We will follow your lead, Greg. You are the one who freed us. We trust you." The pressure weighed heavily on Greg's shoulders, but he refused to back down. The dragons were counting on him. They had been in hiding for so long, and now they were ready to return to the world they had once ruled. But things had changed. The world had changed. As Greg stepped closer to the dragons, he could feel the shift in the air. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The dragons were ready to reclaim their place, but the humans, they wouldn't just let that happen. The world wasn't the same as it had been when the dragons ruled, and the humans were no longer afraid of them. In fact, they had grown powerful too. A few days later, Greg stood before a small group of leaders from the human world. They had sent emissaries, people who held power in the modern world, to negotiate with the dragons. They knew about the dragons' return, and they were here to find out what it meant for them. The meeting took place in a large, open field just outside the mansion, where the dragons had gathered. Greg stood at the front, flanked by Kael'rith and several other dragons. The humans, a group of well-dressed officials and military leaders, stood on the other side, their eyes flicking nervously toward the creatures before them. The tension was thick, and Greg could feel it pressing in on him. The dragons were powerful, but they were also unpredictable. He had no idea how the humans would react to seeing them in person. Would they be afraid? Would they try to fight back? One of the human leaders, a woman with dark hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward. She wore the insignia of the government, a sign of her authority. She looked at Greg, then at Kael'rith, her expression unreadable. "We have come to talk," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We don't know what this means, the return of the dragons, but we will not let fear control us. This is our world now, and we will protect it." Greg swallowed hard. He had known this moment would come. The dragons had been dormant for so long that the humans had forgotten their power. But now that the dragons were back, they weren't going to give up without a fight. The dragons had already lost an empire once. They weren't about to lose it again. "I understand your concerns," Greg said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but inside, he was anything but. "The dragons don't want war. They want to find their place in this world again. We're not here to take over. We're here to live alongside you." The woman narrowed her eyes, clearly skeptical. "Live alongside us?" she repeated. "You expect us to believe that? After centuries of hiding, the dragons suddenly want peace?" Greg nodded. "They don't want to fight. They just need to understand how the world has changed. They're not the same as they were before. They don't have the same powers they once did. They need to learn how to coexist with humanity. And I can help with that." The woman looked at him, and Greg could see the doubt in her eyes. He understood. He had doubts too. But the only way forward was to trust in this strange power that had awakened within him. He had to believe that he could find a way for the dragons and humans to live together, even if it seemed impossible. Kael'rith, sensing the tension in the air, took a step forward, his massive form towering over the humans. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, and the humans instinctively took a step back. "We are not here to conquer," Kael'rith's voice boomed in their minds. "We are here to survive." The world has changed, and we must change with it. But we will not be hunted. We will not be driven away again. The human leaders exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't know how to respond to the voice of the dragon in their minds. Greg could feel the shift in the air, an unspoken tension between two worlds, two races. The dragons had once ruled over humans. Now, they were asking for a chance to coexist. "We don't want war," Greg said again, his voice firm. "But if we don't find a way to work together, things will only get worse." The woman studied him for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "We'll give you a chance," she said. "But know this, if the dragons cause harm to anyone, we will not hesitate to act." Greg felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a start. The dragons weren't going to give up their power so easily, but they were willing to try. And he had to believe that with time, humans and dragons could find a way to live together. As the meeting came to an end, Greg turned to Kael'rith. The dragon's golden eyes met his, and for the first time, Greg saw something different in them. It wasn't just power. It was a trust in him to lead them forward. "We will make it work," Greg said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "We have to." And with that, the first step of the dragon's return had been taken. The world was changing, and Greg Larkin, the unlikely leader, was at the heart of it. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. It was a future that he, the dragons, and humanity would have to share. Together.